Good morning. Pastor Jim Thomas from the Village Chapel here in Nashville, Tennessee with your daily devotional for today. I'm going to pull from Tim and Kathy Keller's God's Wisdom for Navigating Life. These are daily reflections on the book of Proverbs. And so they generally start with one verse from Proverbs and make a little bit of commentary and then offer a prayer. And that'll be our devotion for this morning. Hope you got a cup of coffee, maybe some friend with you there, and let's see what they have to say. Proverbs 20:25. It is a trap to dedicate something rashly and only later to consider one's vows. And of course, when the writer of that proverb wrote that, they meant only later to consider whether or not you're going to keep the vow. And so the whole idea is about not only just telling the truth, but actually keeping your word, keeping your promise. Something I'm not always good at, and most of us can think back on a time when we either made a promise and failed to keep it, or perhaps overpromised and weren't able to keep it. But in our relationship with God, I love that about our Bibles. We just see over and over again down through history how faithful God has been as a promise maker and a promise keeper. And so let's see what the Kellers have to say here. A major part of truth-telling is keeping one's vows or promises. Lewis Smedes wrote, and then they quote, "My wife has lived with at least 5 different men since we were married, and each of the 5 has been me. The connecting link with my old self has always been the memory of the name I took on back there. I am he who will be there with you." And then the Kellers continue, "How can we keep our promises? Look at Jesus," they say. To fulfill God's promise to save us, Hebrews 8:6, he came and died. He truly was the one who said, "I am he who will be there with you." A Christian's whole life, then, is based on a promise kept at great cost. What cost, you say? Cost of the cross. Jesus walking with his disciples throughout the Gospels, we read over and over again. He even predicted his own death. He knew that he had come to lay down his life a ransom for many and to fulfill a promise that God had made so many centuries earlier, that one day he would send a Redeemer, a Messiah, a deliverer who would come and set his people free. Well, the Kellers go on here and say, a Christian's whole life then is based on a promise kept at great cost. When I make a promise, I bear witness that I am not fated. I am not determined. When I make a promise to anyone, I rise above all the conditioning that limits me. No home computer ever promised to be my loyal help. Only a person can make a promise. And when he does, he is most free. Kellers ask a question. They always do in a lot of these writings. I like that. Very pastoral of them to get us thinking a little bit. When was the last time you failed to keep a commitment you made? Oh, wow. Might not have to think back too far myself. And it could be something, kind of small, but it could also be something kind of big. They also asked another question. Are there any promises you ought to make but are afraid to make? Okay, now they're starting to meddle with us a little bit as a spouse, as a parent, as a son or daughter, as a neighbor, about as a employee or an employer, perhaps, a citizen. So many different ways you can think about that. We're going to need some help, aren't we? All of us. The more I think about this is very convicting from the Kellers. Thank the Lord for them, though. I appreciate that's part of truth telling, isn't it? Being realistic and honest with us. Let's join them in the prayer that they've written right here. Lord, I receive life, the Spirit, and union with you, all through your great and precious promises. Since I live only by promise, make me a person of my word, not afraid to make and not too weak to keep commitments. Amen and amen.